Diriyah is in the northwest part of Riyadh. This is the original capital for the Saudi state, for the first Saudi state, which is about now 250 years old.
So we're going to the place where the whole story began.
Exactly.
Out in the desert, a few miles from the modern Saudi capital of Riyadh, sits a mud brick town. Part of it in ruins, part of it in the midst of costly restoration. This is Diriyah, and it was here in the middle of the 18th century that two men forged an alliance which was to become the bedrock of the modern Saudi state. One was the leader of a political dynasty, Mohammed bin Saud. The other, a religious scholar called Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, founder of what the world has come to know as Wahhabism.
Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab is a very distinguished figure in the history of Saudi Arabia, but also in the history of modern Islam. Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab was born in the year 1703. He memorized the Quran at a very early age. When he was 20 years old, he almost picked up all of the Islamic knowledge.
With me is Ahmed Saifuddin Turkistani, a Saudi professor at one of the country's top religious universities.
But he was not happy with what was going on here, particularly in this Najd area, the central part of Saudi Arabia, with all these old-fashioned practices that are not Islamic. Polytheism and associating partners with God, and people coming to so-called saints to get the blessings in an very ignorant way. This whole thing contradicted the basic teachings of Islam. He was not pleased with this, and that's why he started to question, how could I change this?
There's restoration work going on all around. Let's walk up to see. This is obviously the oldest part that remains, isn't it, of the city?
That's right. This is a place called the Turaif neighborhood, or part of Old Diriyah.
We stop at a place I'm told is the original mosque, where the two founding fathers of the Saudi state used to pray. It's not much to look at now, with graffiti scratched on the walls, but we're assured it will all be transformed and restored to its 18th century glory.
The family of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab and the family of Ibn Saud, they started to work together. He said, if you support this cause, you'll be dominating this region. You will be governing with the help of God Almighty. And that's exactly what happened. He was prophesizing what Saudi Arabia was going to be.
It's this marriage of religion and politics that's shaped the character of Saudi Arabia to this day. And as I'll be exploring in these programs for the BBC, has, since 9/11, made it so problematic for the outside world. It's hard to think of another country where religion plays such a central role. Wahhabism is the linchpin of the Saudi state's legitimacy, and promoting it at home and abroad is the state's primary purpose, its raison d'etre. But just what is Wahhabism?
The essence of Wahhabism, as I see it, is purity. They're mainly interested in purifying the religion and stripping it back to what they think of as the original kernel of Islam. They're not interested in government, really. They're only interested in purification, and that's what makes them so repressive.
Lawrence Wright is the Pulitzer Prize-winning author of The Looming Tower, Al-Qaeda's Road to 9/11. He lived and worked in Saudi Arabia for several years while researching the book.
The Saudis have, because of their vast oil wealth, been able to have a disproportionate influence on the world of Islam. According to Al-Hayat, the main Arab newspaper headquartered in London, the Saudis account for 90% of the charitable contributions that go into Islamic world all over the world. And that is bound to have a tremendous effect. The other thing is that Saudi Arabia is the homeland of Islam. It's considered a holy land. And for centuries, all strains of Islam were freely taught in Mecca. This is something that has changed. Now only the Wahhabi strain is allowed to be taught or preached or practiced in Saudi Arabia. And I think that accounts for the peculiar strain of intolerance that's so characteristic of Wahhabism in Saudi Arabia.
To its critics, Wahhabism is intolerant of other forms of Islam, such as Shiism and Sufism. The Wahhabis don't allow any form of non-Muslim worship on Saudi soil, and they hold extremely conservative views on social issues such as women's rights. The charge that they've promoted intolerance at home and abroad is deeply unsettling for the ruling House of Saud. Turki al-Faisal, former head of Saudi intelligence and former ambassador in London and Washington, is one of the kingdom's most senior princes. Some people in the world say in very plain language that Wahhabism is the problem, that Wahhabism has promoted intolerance between Muslims and non-Muslims and has acted as a kind of seedbed for the jihad, that Wahhabi Saudi Arabia was the soil from which the global jihad spread.
And I would say in equally plain terms that that is a false accusation. People say Wahhabism when probably they mean something else. I wish they would put a definition what Wahhabism is. But from our point of view in the kingdom, first of all, there is no such thing as Wahhabism. That's a canard that is meant to confuse and perhaps even out of ignorance to simplify matters so that people can find something to blame.
For Saudis like Prince Turki, Wahhabism is a malicious invention, a stick with which to beat their backs. They reject the term, often choosing to call themselves Salafis, descendants of the Salaf, the early Muslims who were companions of the Prophet Muhammad. But whatever term you use, the core of their belief is an uncompromising monotheism, in Arabic, tawheed, and a total rejection of anything that smacks of idolatry, whether that means a shrine or a tree or a historic monument, even those associated with the Prophet Muhammad. I'm looking at an old photograph of Mecca. How old is the photo, Dr. Sam?
This one I can say exact date is 1904, so it's about a little bit over 100 years old. It shows Mecca as actually was.
How much of this remains today?
Not more than 5%, I think. 95% of what we look at is gone, which is the central area of Mecca. And not only that, but even some of the mountains we look at now is gone.
Up on the left, there are dramatic mountains as a backdrop to Mecca. All of that's now gone?
And that was called Jabal Umar, the mountain of Omar, I think named after the second Caliph of the Prophet. And that now is being blasted off to allow for new towers to take place.
Sami Angawi is a distinguished Saudi architect. He spent his professional life trying to preserve the architectural heritage of the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. Not without risk to himself, he's denounced the destruction of historic buildings and the dynamiting of mountains around Mecca to make way for high-rise apartment blocks for wealthy pilgrims.
God says very clearly in the Quran, I have created the earth, I have created the universe, I have created this, I have created that, and I have put or given the balance. Be careful you do not disturb the balance. But the way now it's done, in a very harsh way in relation to people, and in a very harsh way in relation to the environment, and in a very incredible way in relation to architecture or heritage, and everything is just going away, fading very quickly, because only one school of thought is in position to say what's right and what is wrong, and this is very unusual in Islam. And this is the source of the problem.
The Wahhabi school of Islam.
I don't name it. I don't use names. But I don't even criticize them in the way they believe. I think they could be right and they could be wrong, as well as I could be right or wrong. But to have only one school of thought in Mecca and Medina, the heart of the Muslim world, this is, in my opinion, I could be also wrong, is the real source of the problem.
It's not just in the cradle of Islam that Saudi Arabia has promoted its austere creed, but all around the globe. One former US Treasury official reckons the Saudis have spent upwards of $75 billion in building mosques and schools and exporting Wahhabism. I'm at King Fahd Road in Riyadh, a busy motorway that cuts through the capital, and in front of me is an imposing structure of concrete and glass with big letters over the entrance saying World Assembly of Muslim Youth, popularly known as WAMI. WAMI works to promote Islam, to increase the consciousness of Islam among young people throughout the Muslim world. But questions have been asked about just what its activities are and where its money is going.
We are speaking about a global organization. In fact, we have offices all over the world. We have about 45, 50 offices.
WAMI's Secretary General, Saleh Al-Wahhabi.
At this time, we have about 450 organizations which are members at WAMI.
Can you be sure that particular branches of WAMI throughout the world were not in one way or another directing money towards extremism or violence or radical groups?
Yes, we are very sure, because the money is in fact controlled locally, and anything in say our office in Washington or our office in Kuala Lumpur is controlled in Saudi Arabia. And I would say that if there is anything in any country, we are ready to face the allegations. We are ready to accept any action that will be against that office or against WAMI. And we also think that any behavior of any local office or any local person, any abusement by any person, the punishment should not be directed to the organization, rather it should be directed to the person himself. What I say that all the time, give us evidence, let us go even to choose whatever court, and we will have our evidence, give us your proof. Unfortunately, they did not.
WAMI and similar organizations are on the defensive, struggling to refute the serious charges against them. They're part of a well-funded global network of Islamic institutions set up in the 60s and 70s by Saudi Arabia's King Faisal. Bernard Haeckel, a professor at Princeton and a leading expert on Wahhabism.
Faisal set up institutions that would defend the legitimacy of the Saudi regime through Islam, and not just through defend it domestically, but internationally. So he rallied many Muslim forces, tried to convince them of the value of Salafism or of Wahhabism, and then put money and institutional work into the funding, the development of this ideology or this sect-like thinking throughout the Muslim world.
If you had to generalize about how far the Saudis got, so to speak, value for money, what would you say?
The Saudis did get their money's worth here and serious returns on their investment, except that I think they also felt overconfident in their ability to control this movement and these people. And this clearly was a genie that came out of the bottle, and they could no longer put it back in, especially after the war in Afghanistan had been won against the Soviets.
Afghanistan was the training ground for a new generation of radical Islamists, including the Al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden. After the Al-Qaeda attacks against the Twin Towers in New York, the world looked around for the roots of radical Islam and found them in the mosques and madrasas built with Saudi money and the Wahhabi literature exported around the world, preaching suspicion and hatred of non-believers. Adel Jubeir, the Saudi ambassador in Washington, doesn't deny that there's a problem.
Has there been material published in Saudi Arabia that is intolerant? Yes. It would be incorrect of me to say that this hasn't happened. Has it happened because we as the Saudi government has a policy of doing so? Absolutely not. That charge is ridiculous. We are looking at our educational system. We are trying to instill values of tolerance in our educational system. We are looking at programs to retrain public school teachers in our education system. We are working with the imams in the mosques in Saudi Arabia in order to spread a message of tolerance and a message of opposition to violence and extremism. We are doing it through documentaries on our television and in our media. We are doing it through public discussions of our national dialogue. And I do not believe that there is any country in the world that has done as much in this area over the last few years as Saudi Arabia has. And yet the charges continue.
Certainly the current ruler, King Abdullah, is pouring billions of dollars into building new schools and colleges. But is he reforming what's being taught in them? Hassan Maliki, a Saudi writer and educationalist, grew up in the Wahhabi tradition, but he gradually came to question it.
I'm
just going into Hassan Maliki's library, which is a huge library of Arabic books, and he's telling me that there are many more elsewhere in the house. He's collected a huge number of books about Wahhabism and about the school curriculum here in Saudi Arabia, books which he regards as fostering extremism. Let me ask you about the education system and the textbooks. When you studied the curriculum, what were your main conclusions?
My conclusion is that they are teaching the students that whoever disagrees with Wahhabism is either an infidel or a deviant, and they should repent or be killed. This is an attack on half the Saudi society. They say things against the Shia, against the Sufis, against all the sects, against the diversity we should be proud of.
Officials are saying that they've made changes, they've removed some passages about the non-believer, the kafir. Do you believe that they have made significant changes to the school books?
When you have 40 bombs in your home, what difference does it make if you get rid of 20? Isn't 20 enough to do the job and blow up the house?
I asked Dr. Maliki to give me an example. He showed me a text for 13-year-olds currently in use in Saudi schools, which I later had translated. Here's one typical passage.
There should be total enmity between Muslims and polytheists. Believers are not allowed to love polytheists or support them, even if they are close to them. Religiously sanctioned love is only allowed towards Muslims. As for the polytheist, he should be hated for his unbelief, even if he's close to you.
Polytheists include Sufis and Shiites, whom the Wahhabis accuse of idolatry. I told Dr. Maliki of the assurances I'd been given by the Saudi ambassador in Washington, that the authorities are reforming the education system to instill values of tolerance.
I can answer only with a laugh.
Your response to him is a laugh. It's laughter. Dr. Maliki has already paid a stiff price for his outspokenness. He's been arrested, interrogated by the secret police. His books are banned, and he's not allowed to write for Saudi newspapers. Is this interview going to get you into trouble?
There is nothing more they can do to me. It is important to tell the truth. Truth is the last weapon we have.
Hassan Maliki and many of the other Saudis I've spoken to think the root of the problem is the influence of the country's powerful and highly conservative Wahhabi religious establishment. It's that crucial alliance, remember, between the Al Saud dynasty and the Wahhabi clerics, forged 2.5 centuries ago, that's been the bedrock of the Saudi state ever since. So to take on the religious establishment would jeopardize the alliance on which the House of Saud's legitimacy depends. The result is an official ambivalence. The authorities take steps that go too far for the religious conservatives, but not nearly far enough for liberals like newspaper columnist Hussein Shabokshi.
I will
refer to what the Germans did post-World War II. They reviewed the Nazi publications and Nazi cultural products, removed what was dangerous and kept what was beneficial. We need to do the same thing in our cultural heritage that has caused, some of it has caused extremists to come out.
That's a strong analogy between Nazism and religious extremism in Saudi Arabia.
Of course, they're both dangerous, yeah, and we need to equate that because the end result is the same: destructive, dangerous, and deadly. We need to equate the dangers of both. Every idea that has produced evil in the world, anything, communism, Zionism, Nazism, apartheid, religious extremism, all have to be equated and all have to be dealt equally.
Are you worried that, although there are arguments about the numbers, that clearly many young Saudis have gone to blow themselves up in Iraq and maybe in Chechnya, they've gone to Lebanon, they've gone to other parts of the Muslim world? What do you feel about this phenomenon?
I feel, again, I go back to the religious establishment. It has not done enough to reform itself. It has not been pushed enough to reform itself. There's still an ignorant message being sent to the youth to go basically kill themselves. And I definitely think it's still full of ignorance.
To me, two conclusions stand out. First, that despite official Saudi denials, Wahhabism is a narrow and uncompromising creed at odds with diversity and tolerance. And second, that in promoting it abroad, the Saudis set in motion a process they couldn't control, which led, via Afghanistan, to the shock of 9/11. Next week, in the second of these BBC programmes, The Money Trail. I talked to some of the top US investigators who've tried, with very mixed results, to find out where Saudi cash has ended up.
YouTube.com के लिए महाकवि मिर्जा जमाल की पेशकश।